Every January, someone in this town wakes up knowing something is wrong. Not because of a nightmare, not because of a sound, but because the cold feels personal. It settles inside your chest instead of the air. It lingers longer in certain rooms. It presses against doors at night like something waiting for permission. People here don't say the word ghost. They say, "It's January," and then they lock their doors earlier than usual. I moved back to this town in early January because it was cheap, quiet, and temporary. That's what I told myself. The truth was simpler. I needed somewhere that didn't ask questions. Winter had already dug itself deep into the streets by the time I arrived. Snow sat untouched along the sidewalks, packed hard and gray at the edges, like it had given up trying to look clean. The houses all looked the same as I remembered them. Low roofs, narrow porches, windows pulled tight against the cold. Nothing looked haunted. That was the first mistake people make. They expect damage, broken glass, rot, something dramatic. This place was neat, maintained, careful, too careful for a town that had lost as many people as it had. The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence, it was how early the lights went out. By 6:30, most houses were already dark, curtains drawn, porches empty, no one lingering outside. No one shoveling longer than necessary. January did that, I thought. The second thing I noticed was the way people avoided each other after sunset. Not obviously, just enough to matter. At the grocery store, conversations ended abruptly once it got late. A woman ahead of me in line glanced at the clock, then at the windows, and rushed her change into her pocket without counting it. "Gets colder fast," the cashier said, even though the temperature hadn't dropped. No one corrected her. I rented a small house on the edge of town, close enough to the woods that the trees pressed in tight behind the backyard fence. The landlord didn't ask how long I planned to stay. "Just don't go walking at night," he said, handing me the keys. "Wild animals?" I asked. He hesitated. "January," he replied instead. The house itself was fine, old but solid. Heat worked, pipes groaned like they always had in winter. I unpacked, made coffee, tried to convince myself the faint unease in my chest was just the adjustment of being back somewhere I'd tried to forget. That night, the temperature dropped hard. The kind of cold that sharpens sound instead of dulling it. I woke just after midnight to the sound of knocking. Not loud, not urgent, measured. 3 slow knocks against the front door. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening. No footsteps, no shuffling, just the quiet afterward, thick and waiting. I told myself it was the house settling, wood contracting, pipes knocking back. That was lie number 1. The knocking came again, same rhythm, same restraint. I got out of bed and stood at the top of the stairs, heart beating slow and heavy. The hallway felt colder than the bedroom, not drafty, just wrong. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded too loud. No answer. I looked through the peephole. The porch light was on, casting a pale circle over the snow. Footprints led up to the door, bare feet. I didn't open it. I stood there until the cold crept through my socks and into my legs, until the footprints outside faded slightly as frost crept over them, until the silence became unbearable. By morning, the snow was smooth again. No footprints, no marks, no explanation. At work, when I mentioned it casually, laughed it off even. No one asked questions. A man in the break room stiffened slightly when I described the knocking. "Did you answer?" he asked. "No." He nodded once, relief flickering across his face. "Good," he said. "They don't like it when you answer." "They?" I asked. He looked at the calendar on the wall. "It's January," he said quietly. "You'll get used to it." That was the moment I realized something was wrong, not with the house, with the month, because people here didn't treat January like a time of year. They treated it like a condition, and whatever came with it was already aware that I had come back. By the second week of January, I realized the town had rules. No one ever explained them outright. They didn't have to. The rules lived in behavior, in hesitation, in the way conversations bent around certain subjects and then quietly moved on. People stopped making plans after dark. They avoided walking alone once the sun went down. And no one, absolutely no one, opened their door at night in January. I noticed it first at the hardware store. A man ahead of me in line kept glancing at his phone, checking the time every few seconds. When the clerk apologized for the delay, the man didn't complain. He just nodded and said, "It's fine. I just don't want to be out late." It was barely 5:30. Outside, the sky was already losing its color, fading into that flat winter gray that makes everything feel unfinished. The man hurried to his truck without returning the clerk's wave. "January," the clerk muttered to no one in particular. It was always said like that, not angrily, not fearfully, resigned. At work, I started noticing empty desks. Not newly empty, not like someone had quit or been fired. More like they'd always been that way, and I'd only just begun to see them. Desks with no personal items, no dust outlines, no nameplates. When I asked about one of them, a woman from accounting frowned. "That's been empty for years," she said. "I could have sworn someone sat there last week." She gave me a look that wasn't exactly concern. "You're new back," she said. "January messes with people." That explanation came up a lot. January made people forget. January made people imagine things. January made sounds seem closer than they were. No one ever said January brought anything with it. That was the rule. The first attack happened on a Thursday. They didn't call it that, of course. They said a man had slipped on the ice behind his house. I heard about it from my neighbor, an older woman who rarely left her porch during the day and never at night. She knocked on my door just after noon, a plate of cookies in her hands like an excuse. "You heard about Tom?" she asked. "Tom who?" She hesitated, then waved her hand vaguely toward the houses down the road. "Doesn't matter," she said. "He's alive." That word landed heavier than it should have. "Alive," I repeated. She nodded quickly. "That's what matters." Curiosity got the better of me. Later that afternoon, I walked down the road toward the house she'd pointed at. The snow behind the fence was disturbed, churned up like someone had struggled to stand. The back door hung slightly open, a thin line of darkness visible inside. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table when I stepped in. He looked wrong. Not injured, not pale, cold. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers slightly curled, as if they hadn't fully remembered how to relax. His breath came out in shallow bursts, fogging the air in front of him, even though the heater was running. "Hey," I said softly. "Your door was open." He didn't look at me. "They came early this year," he said.
Who did? His eyes shifted toward me then, wide and glassy. I didn't answer, he said quickly. I swear I didn't. I turned off the lights. I waited. My skin prickled. Tom? I said carefully. What happened? He swallowed hard. They stood outside, he said, not knocking, just breathing. I could hear it through the door. I glanced toward the back door. There were wet footprints on the floor, bare feet, leading from the door to the middle of the kitchen, and then stopping. They don't come in all the way, Tom whispered, not unless you invite them. Then what do they do? I asked. His jaw tightened. They remind you. He lifted his sleeve. The skin on his forearm was blue-gray, marbled like frostbite, but there were no cuts, no bruises, just cold, burned deep into the flesh. They held me, he said, not hard, just long enough. I took a step back. What did they say? He shook his head violently. They don't talk. They make you remember what you didn't do. That night, the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't at my front door. It came from the back of the house, near the woods where the fence pressed close. The sound was softer there, muffled by snow and trees. One knock, then another. I stayed in bed, heart pounding, staring at the dark outline of my bedroom door. Something moved outside, not footsteps, dragging. The sound circled the house slowly, like whatever was out there was learning the shape of it, learning where the walls were thinnest, where the heat escaped. I thought of Tom's words. They came early this year. The knocking stopped just before dawn. In the morning, I found handprints on the back window. Not bloody, not dirty, frosted, perfectly shaped as if someone had pressed their palms against the glass and let the cold do the rest. In work, no one mentioned Tom. His desk was empty, not newly empty, just empty. And when I asked the woman from accounting if he'd come in late, she was confused. Tom? She said. I don't think anyone by that name works here. That's when the fear shifted, because I understood something the town didn't want to say out loud. January wasn't just when they came back. January was when they started being remembered. And the more they were remembered, the closer they got.
After Tom disappeared, people stopped pretending nothing was happening. They still didn't talk about it openly, but the silence changed. It became tighter, more deliberate, like everyone was holding the same breath and hoping no one else would exhale too loudly. At work, desks stayed empty longer than they should have. No announcements, no emails, no "we're sorry to inform you," just gaps. People avoided eye contact in the hallways. Conversations ended the moment footsteps approached. And every afternoon around the same time, phones came out, clocks were checked, jackets were zipped. Everyone left before dark. I started keeping my own list. Not names, patterns. The ones who vanished had something in common. They all lived on streets closest to the edge of town, the woods, the open fields, the places where the wind had nothing to stop it. And every one of them had been here during that January years ago. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I could feel it hanging behind every interaction, heavy and unresolved. The cold inside my house grew worse. Not everywhere, just in certain spots. The hallway outside my bedroom felt like standing near an open freezer. The bathroom mirror fogged over even when I hadn't used the sink. At night, I could see my breath when I leaned close to the glass. The heater worked fine. The inspector confirmed it. There's no draft, he said. Old houses do this in winter. He didn't step into the hallway. That night, I dreamed of knocking. Not hearing it, doing it. I stood in the snow outside a row of houses, my hands red and numb, knocking gently on door after door. Lights went out as I approached. Curtains twitched and closed. No one answered. When I woke up, my knuckles ached. The first time they tried to get me to open the door, it wasn't with knocking, it was with my name. I was washing dishes when I heard it, soft and close, coming from just beyond the back door. My name, spoken once, correctly, not whispered, not shouted, remembered. I froze, hands submerged in cold water. "Hello?" I said, before I could stop myself. Silence. Then the sound of breathing, slow, careful, patient. I backed away from the door, heart hammering. "You don't have to open it," a voice said. I turned. My neighbor stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. She hadn't knocked. I hadn't heard her come in. Her face looked drawn, older than I remembered. Dark circles pressed deep beneath her eyes. "They can't come in unless you answer properly," she said, "not unless you acknowledge them." "Who are they?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not who," she said, "when." She sat heavily at the table, hands shaking. "January brings them back," she continued. "But they don't come all at once. They start with reminders." "What kind of reminders?" I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the back door. "Sounds," she said. "Cold, names, dreams." "And then?" I pressed. "And then," she said quietly, "they touch you." I thought of Tom's arm, the frostbitten skin. "What happens if they do?" I asked. She met my eyes. "You don't disappear right away," she said. "You just stop being warm inside. You start thinking about things you didn't want to think about anymore." She stood abruptly. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "They don't like it when we talk." "Why?" I asked. "Because remembering makes them clearer." She left without another word. That night, the attack came without warning. No knocking, no voice, just cold. It seeped into the bedroom like water, creeping under the door, climbing the walls. The air thickened, pressing down on my chest until every breath felt borrowed. I sat up, gasping. The window was frosted solid from the inside. A shape moved beyond the glass. Not a body, an impression, as if someone were standing just close enough to leave their outline in the cold. My heart raced. "I didn't open the door," I whispered. The shape leaned closer. I felt hands on my shoulders, not gripping, holding. The cold burned deep, sharp and invasive, crawling through muscle and bone until my vision blurred. Images flooded my mind. A road buried in snow, a man on his knees knocking weakly, lights going out one by one. My house, my door, me standing on the other side, hand on the lock. "I was scared," I said aloud, teeth chattering. "I didn't know it was you." The pressure eased slightly. The hands remained. They weren't here to punish me. They were here to make sure I remembered. When I woke up, the room was normal again, warm, quiet, but my shoulders were blue with cold, the skin numb and aching like it had been pressed against ice for hours. At work, another desk was empty. This one was closer to mine, and for the first time, someone said it out loud. "They're finishing what we started," a man whispered near the coffee machine. No one corrected him, because everyone knew January wasn't over yet, and neither were they. By the third week of January, the town stopped pretending this was just a bad winter. People still went to work, stores still opened, snow still got plowed in the mornings, but everything felt thinner, like the normal routines were only there to keep something else from pushing through. That was when the stories started to surface. Not publicly, not in groups, in pieces. I heard the first one in the break room from a man I barely knew. He spoke without looking at me, his voice low enough that it almost blended into the hum of the vending machines. "You were here back then," he said. I froze. "Back when?" I asked. He glanced toward the doorway, then back to his coffee. "The winter nobody talks about," he said. "The one that taught us how to be quiet." I didn't deny it. I couldn't. The truth had been sitting just beneath my thoughts for days now, pressing upward every time the cold returned. "Yes," I said, "I was here." He nodded slowly. "Then you already know," he said. "You just don't remember all of it yet." The snowstorm had started on a Sunday night. I remembered that much. Forecasts had warned us, but no one expected it to hit as hard as it did. By midnight, roads were impassable. Power flickered across town, coming and going like an unreliable promise. The wind howled through the streets, sharp and insistent. People stayed inside. That was the sensible thing to do. That was what we told ourselves. Sometime after 1 in the morning, the knocking started. Not everywhere, just in certain neighborhoods. The outer streets, the houses closest to the woods and the open roads. At first, people thought it was neighbors checking in. Then they realized it wasn't moving. The same knocking at different doors in no particular order. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. Phones rang that night. I remembered that now, clearly. My phone had buzzed on the nightstand, lighting up the room, an unknown number. I didn't answer it. I let it go to voicemail and told myself I'd listen later. Everyone did. By morning, the storm had passed. Snow lay heavy and untouched across the streets. The town looked buried, but peaceful, like it had been sealed away. That was when they found the first body, a man named Daniel. I hadn't known him well. He lived 3 streets over, close enough to hear the wind tear through the trees, far enough that help would have taken too long, even if someone had tried. He was found slumped against a porch railing, bare hands, frozen skin, knuckles raw and red. The official report said exposure. The town accepted it. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next 2 days, they found more. A woman behind a grocery store, her coat half open, as if she'd been searching for warmth. An elderly couple in a car that had run out of gas just outside town limits. A teenager curled up near a shed, phone dead, messages unsent. None of them had been strangers. They were people we recognized, people we could have helped. But the storm had given us an excuse. January had given us permission. I hadn't gone outside that night. I remembered that too. I'd stood in my hallway, listening to the wind, listening to something else beneath it. The sound of knocking carried faintly through the storm, distant but unmistakable. I told myself it couldn't be real, that no one would be out in that weather, that if it was real, someone else would answer. That was the lie that kept us warm. Back in the present, the cold settled deeper into my bones as these memories sharpened. The ghosts weren't new. They were us, or what was left behind when we chose silence over action. The attacks made more sense now. They weren't random. They weren't cruel for the sake of it. They were reenactments. Tom hadn't been dragged from his house. He'd been held in the cold long enough to feel what they'd felt. My shoulders hadn't been bruised. They'd been reminded. That night, I dreamed again. This time, I was standing outside my own house, snow whipping against my face. The porch light was on. Warmth glowed through the window. I knocked. Inside,
I could see myself standing in the hallway, hand hovering near the lock. I whispered my own name. The figure inside turned away. When I woke up, my pillow was damp with frost. The town started changing its behavior after that. Lights stayed on longer, but doors remained closed. People left notes on their porches. Thermoses of hot drinks appeared near the roads at night. Small gestures. Too late. The ghosts noticed. That evening, as I walked home, I saw them clearly for the first time. Not shapes, not impressions, people. They stood at the edge of the street, half-formed, their outlines shimmering in the cold air. Their faces were pale, features softened by frost, eyes dark and steady. They didn't rush me, they didn't reach for me, they just watched. And in that moment, I understood the final rule. They weren't here to take revenge by killing us. They were here to make us stand where they had stood, to feel the weight, to understand the choice we made. And January wasn't finished yet.
By the last full week of January, the town stopped pretending it could fix what was happening. The small gestures ended. No more thermoses on porches, no more handwritten notes taped to mailboxes, no more quiet apologies spoken to empty streets. People realized something important too late. The ghosts weren't interested in being comforted. They were interested in balance. The first public incident happened just after sunset on a street that had always been considered safe, close to the center of town, well lit, lined with houses whose owners had lived there their entire lives. A woman named Carol collapsed in the snow while shoveling her driveway. People saw it happen. That was the difference. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out for help. She just froze in place, hands gripping the shovel handle, breath fogging once, then stopping. Neighbors rushed outside. Someone called her name. Someone else reached for her arm. The moment they touched her, the temperature dropped so sharply it stole the breath from everyone nearby. Frost bloomed across coats and scarves. Eyelashes crystallized. The air burned. And for a few seconds, just a few, everyone standing there felt what it was like to wait in the cold with no door opening. Carol didn't die. When the cold released her, she slumped to the ground, gasping, skin blue and rigid like she'd been submerged in ice water. Paramedics arrived quickly. They wrapped her in blankets, loaded her into the ambulance. She survived, but she didn't speak afterward. Not because she couldn't, because she wouldn't. That night, no one in town slept easily. The attacks were no longer private. They were lessons. I felt it coming for me 2 nights later. There was no knocking this time, no voice, no warning. I was walking home from work, cutting across a side street I'd taken 100 times before. The snow underfoot crunched softly, the sound loud in the still air. Halfway down the block, the streetlights went out, not all at once, one by one. The dark pressed in, thick and immediate. I stopped. The air changed. It wasn't just cold, it was deliberate, heavy, like something settling around me, shaping the space. "You know why we're here," a voice said behind me, not spoken aloud, felt. I turned slowly. They stood in the road now, clearer than before. Several of them, men and women, different ages, different faces, all marked by the same stillness. They didn't reach for me, they stepped aside. The snow beneath my feet shifted, hardening, pulling me into place. I was standing in the exact spot where Daniel had been found all those years ago. I recognized it without being told. The porch railing behind me, the angle of the steps, the way the wind cut between the houses. The cold deepened.
It crept up through my boots, locking my ankles, my knees, my hips. My breath stuttered, each inhale shorter than the last. I wanted to run. I couldn't. "We waited," the presence said, "so you could stay warm." Images flooded my mind again, sharper this time. Daniel knocking weakly, lights going out, my phone buzzing on the nightstand, me turning away. "I didn't know," I whispered. The cold tightened. "You knew enough," they replied. They didn't hold me. They didn't have to. They let the cold do what it had always done. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Thoughts slowed, thickened. My hands went numb. My legs trembled, then locked. This was how it had been for them. Not dramatic, just long, just quiet. When the cold finally eased, I collapsed into the snow, lungs burning as air rushed back in. I was alive, barely. In the days that followed, more people were made to stand, at doorways, on sidewalks, at the edges of parking lots where cars had run out of gas years ago. No one died, but no one escaped unchanged. Some people couldn't stop shivering, even indoors. Some refused to go near doors at all. Some stared out windows for hours, watching the road like they expected someone to come back. The ghosts began choosing witnesses, people who hadn't been directly responsible, people who'd been children, people who'd arrived later. They wanted the story carried forward. And as January crept towards its final nights, the town understood something terrifying. This wasn't the end. This was preparation.
By the time the final week of January arrived, the town was exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. People moved through their days like they were already half gone. Faces were drawn tight, eyes avoided mirrors. Conversations were shorter, quieter, edged with something close to dread. Everyone knew the pattern now. The ghosts returned every January. They reminded, they waited, they chose, and the closer February crept, the more deliberate they became. The town council held an emergency meeting on a Tuesday night. Attendance was mandatory. They said it was about safety, about coordination, about supporting one another. What it was really about was fear. The meeting room was packed, coats still on, breath fogging in the cold air. Someone had turned the heat up too high, but it didn't help. The cold we felt wasn't coming from the vents. A man I recognized from childhood stood at the front of the room. He cleared his throat several times before speaking. "We need to talk about what they want," he said. No one asked who they were. "We've tried everything else," he continued. "We've stayed inside. We've left lights on. We've gone out to help when we can." A murmur rippled through the room. "Not at night," someone muttered. The man nodded, tight-lipped. "That's the problem," he said. "We're still deciding when it's acceptable to help." The room went quiet. I felt it then, that pressure in my chest, the same one that came before the cold set in. "They don't want apologies," a woman near the back said suddenly. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "We've been apologizing for years, quietly, to ourselves." Heads turned. "They want acknowledgement," she said. "They want us to stop pretending it was unavoidable." A man stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If we say it out loud," he snapped, "we make it real." "It was already real," she replied. "That's why they're here." The argument escalated quickly. People shouting, accusations flying, old resentments resurfacing, and beneath it all, something else. Listening. The lights flickered once, then again. The temperature dropped. Everyone froze. The ghosts appeared at the edges of the room. Not fully, not yet, just impressions in the corners, pale shapes where walls met ceiling, cold spots that burned against the skin. They weren't angry, they were patient.
"We didn't mean to," someone whispered. The pressure intensified. The ghosts didn't respond because meaning hadn't mattered that night, only choice. The meeting ended without resolution. People left in silence, coats pulled tight, eyes fixed on the ground. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, steady, familiar. It reminded me too much of that first January. That night, the ghosts changed how they came. They didn't wait for darkness. They came at dusk. I saw them from my front window, standing across the street, not blocking the road, not approaching, waiting. I opened the door before I realized what I was doing. Cold air rushed in, sharp and immediate. They didn't move. "I know what you want," I said, voice trembling. "You want us to say it." One of them stepped forward. Not Daniel, not Tom, a woman I barely remembered. "You want us to admit we chose ourselves," I continued, "that we heard you, that we stayed warm while you waited." The cold pressed closer. "Yes," the presence said, not aloud, not with words, just certainty. "And if we do?" I asked. The ghosts didn't answer, because the answer wasn't simple. Later that night, I understood why the town was afraid. Saying it out loud wouldn't end January. It would change what January took. Acknowledgement wouldn't send the ghosts away. It would let them finish, and finishing meant something the town wasn't ready to face. Someone would have to stay outside on purpose, not as punishment, as recognition.
February didn't feel like relief. It felt like something stepping back just far enough to watch. Snow melted unevenly, revealing patches of dead grass and darkened pavement beneath. The streets grew wet and reflective. Days stretched longer, but the light didn't feel warmer. It just lingered. People tried to return to normal. That was the word they used, normal. They went back to making plans after dark. Kids waited for buses without parents standing too close. Conversations drifted towards safer topics, sports, weather, work. No one mentioned January, not directly, but the town carried it differently now. Doors still opened when someone knocked. That hadn't changed back. If anything, people opened them too quickly, as if afraid of what hesitation might invite. I didn't recover the way the others seemed to. The cold never fully left my body. It sat deep in my joints, in the spaces between breaths. Some mornings, I woke up with my fingers numb, even though the house was warm. My shoulders ached in a way that reminded me of pressure rather than pain. Doctors couldn't explain it. Circulation issues, one suggested. Lingering nerve response, another said. I stopped going. At night, I still dreamed of waiting, not outside my own house, outside someone else's. Different porches, different doors, same knocking. I never opened them. That part mattered. People started coming to me quietly, not asking questions, not looking for explanations, just standing nearby. A woman from 3 streets over told me she couldn't sleep unless the porch light was on. A man I barely knew admitted he still heard breathing outside his bedroom window when the wind picked up. "They're gone, right?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "They're quiet," I said instead. That was the truth. The town held together through spring and summer. Life filled in the cracks the cold had left behind. Flowers bloomed, lawns were mowed, barbecues returned. But there were signs, always signs. A doorbell that rang once at 3 in the morning and never again.
A stretch of road where frost lingered long after sunrise, a porch light that flickered even after the bulb was replaced. I noticed people paying attention now, watching, listening. That might have been the ghost's real victory. In August, I found something buried in my backyard, not deep, just beneath the soil, where frost would have reached it easily. A glove, leather, cracked, frozen stiff despite the heat. Inside the cuff, a name was written in faded ink. Daniel. I put it back where I found it. By December, the town had started preparing, not decorations, supplies, extra blankets, generators tested, emergency kits placed near doors. No one said why. January arrived without ceremony. The first snow fell softly, covering the streets like a careful hand smoothing over a scar. On the second night of the month, I heard knocking, 3 slow taps, measured, patient. I didn't open the door, neither did anyone else, but this time the knocking didn't move on. It stayed, waiting.
The 2nd January felt different. Not louder, not colder, more certain. The town had prepared the way people prepare for storms they believe they understand. Supplies were stocked, doors were reinforced, emergency numbers were written on scraps of paper and taped near phones. What we hadn't prepared for was intention. The knocking that first night didn't move from house to house like it had years ago. It stayed at mine. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. I stood in the hallway, coat already on, boots by the door. I hadn't planned it, I'd just woken up knowing. This time, the cold didn't seep in gradually. It pressed against the walls, thick and heavy, like the house was being lowered into something deeper. "They're not asking anymore," I whispered to myself. Outside, the porch light flickered, then steadied. I opened the door. The air hit me like a held breath being released. They stood there, clearer than ever. Not just the ones I remembered, not just the faces from that first January. More. Men and women from years I hadn't lived here. Shapes that felt older than the town itself, their features blurred by repetition and memory. "You waited once," they said. "Yes," I replied. "That taught us something." The cold deepened. That waiting can be shared. The streetlights down the block began to glow, one by one. Doors opened. People stepped onto porches without being told to. No panic, no shouting, understanding. This time, no one was chosen. The cold spread evenly, blanketing the street like snow. People stood where they were, on porches, on sidewalks, in driveways, waiting. The ghosts didn't touch anyone. They didn't need to. The town itself had learned the shape of the punishment. Minutes passed, then longer. Breath fogged, muscles stiffened, time slowed. Children cried quietly. Parents held them without moving toward warmth. No one went inside. This was different from the 1st January. This was collective. The ghosts watched, not with satisfaction, with completion. As dawn approached, the cold eased, not fully, enough. People staggered back indoors, shaking, silent, alive. No one spoke about it afterward. There were no meetings, no debates, no explanations, because nothing needed to be decided anymore. The town had made its choice. In the days that followed, January passed quietly. No more knocking, no more voices, no more sudden drops in temperature. February came, again. This time, the cold left more behind. 2 people lost fingers to frostbite.
A man suffered heart failure weeks later, his body never quite recovering. A woman stopped leaving her house altogether. No one counted them as victims because no one could say it hadn't been a choice. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because someone has to remember how it works. Because the ghosts didn't come back to take revenge the way we expected. They came back to teach us how to live with what we'd done. And they succeeded.
Years have passed since the 2nd January. People who move here don't notice anything wrong at first. They comment on how quiet the town feels, how safe, how everyone seems polite, considerate, almost careful with one another. They don't stay long enough to understand why. By now, the routines are automatic. Porch lights are checked before sunset. Phones are charged overnight. Boots stay by the door all winter, even indoors. Children are taught early not to knock on doors after dark, not as a rule, as a habit. No one tells them why. I still live in the same house. The cold never left my body, not completely. Even in summer, there are mornings when my hands ache like they've been held in snow. Doctors stopped offering explanations once I stopped asking. Every December, the town changes. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough. People start finishing sentences sooner. Apologies come quicker. Arguments end before they escalate. No one wants to carry unresolved things into January, because January remembers. The ghosts haven't appeared the way they did before. No figures in the road, no hands on shoulders, no public lessons. That doesn't mean they're gone. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the wind press against the houses just a little harder than it should. Sometimes frost forms patterns on windows that look too much like fingerprints. Sometimes a doorbell rings once, softly, and never again. And every year, without fail, on the coldest night of January, people step outside. Not together, not announced, just quietly. They stand on porches, in driveways, at the edge of sidewalks, wrapped in coats and scarves, breath fogging the air, eyes fixed forward, waiting. No one times it, no one counts minutes. They stay until the cold bites deep enough to hurt. Then they go back inside. The town doesn't talk about why. Outsiders sometimes ask why people here seem so serious in winter, why there's a heaviness beneath the calm. Someone usually shrugs and says, "January does that." They don't mention the night years ago when knocking echoed through the storm. They don't mention the doors that stayed closed. They don't mention the people who never made it inside. They don't mention the lesson learned too late. I do. Not out loud. I remember. Because that's what the ghosts wanted. Not revenge, not blood. Memory. January doesn't bring them back anymore, because it doesn't have to. The town carries them now. And every winter, when the cold settles just a little too deep, when silence stretches too long, I know the truth most people refuse to say. We didn't survive that 1st January because we were lucky. We survived because someone else didn't. And January never lets us forget who that was. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Death ReHaunt. Some places don't need to be haunted. They only need to be remembered.